I didn't want to. Wherever we go, there's shelling everywhere. This is probably some kind of base, right? I think it's like that everywhere. An exposition on Crimea.
August 27th. Something terrible started in Crimea.
This is fucked up.
Ukrainian Neptune's missiles have reportedly attacked 3 significant nuclear airfields located in Crimea. Consequently, everything there is now engulfed in flames. Indeed, a massive explosion occurred. Bang! Easy, easy. Are you filming? Unbelievable. There were explosions in Sevastopol, Simferopol, Yevpatoria, Bakhchisaray district, Alushta, Feodosia, Saki, and Novofedorivka. No way! The airfields in Saki, Fadiska, and Kirovsky are on fire. Powerful special operations have begun in Crimea to eliminate Russian military forces. The nuclear triad, the Black Sea Fleet, airfields, and oil refineries are under attack. You will be blown away. We're flying. We're flying. Give the damn order. Crimea was burning last night. 4 key military airfields were attacked. Where does the strategic nuclear force take off from?
This is a disaster.
Saki, Gvardeyskoye, and Kirovskoye. There was a significant strike on aviation facilities. Approximately 200 unmanned aerial vehicles, commonly known as drones, launched a coordinated attack on the Crimean Peninsula last night. The drones targeted the Saki, Gvardeyskoye, and Kirovskoye airfields. NASA satellites have detected a massive fire near the Gvardeyskoye airfield in Crimea. Another fuel tank caught fire at the Crystal oil depot in Engels. The whole city is covered in smoke. As they say, the show must go on, or action at the oil depot. The situation at Crystal in Engels continues. It's been going on for several days now. Meanwhile, Russia has lost yet another court case, number 25. All special operations have destroyed the decision-making center in the Keshten direction, and the headquarters of the Makayevka expansion has also been attacked and blown up. We will discuss this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health.
Roman Igorovich, let's start with the hell in occupied Crimea, because more than 200 drones attacked 3 key military airfields. Gvardeyskoye, Saki, Kirovskoye. Novofedorivka was also attacked. The floor is yours.
Novofedorivka is a depot near Saki, so basically Novofedorivka and the Saki airfield are one complex. Today's strike on Crimea was truly large-scale, exactly what we have repeatedly, let's say, gently requested on air. They circled around Crimea, but didn't touch it. It was like a sacred cow. Honestly, today was a good one. The attack that was carried out was successful. Indeed, 200 drones can overwhelm any air defense. Thanks to the large number of decoys, the Russian forces, at least the air defense units, used up their missiles today. And still, quite serious damage was inflicted on the Russian airfields, both in Saki and near Simferopol, naturally near Sevastopol as well, but drones also reached Kerch. There are 2 airfields there that are currently being prepared for such launches, for new batches from Iran, the second and third ones. And these 2 airfields were also attacked, at least as of now. The operation was well thought out and excellently executed. Most likely our army was already involved. In other words, this is not a special operation. Most likely it was army work already. You could even say it was the work of the new commander of unmanned systems forces who has just taken office. Although in reality, of course, it should be our sailors working in Crimea, that is the Navy, the naval forces as part of the naval forces. There should be our own Madyak, our own sailor, a Madyak who will create unmanned systems forces specifically related to the maritime domain, underwater, surface, and aerial for the liberation of Crimea. If today's attack is not a one-off, but systematic, then believe me, by the end of the year, at least half of the Russians in Crimea will have disappeared from there. They will simply disappear. Because if this happens every day, yes, even 100 drones targeting airfields, first, definitely the airfields. Why the airfield? The airfield area, Russia doesn't use it in several ways. First, it's the location for tactical or army aviation. That means planes and helicopters. Second, the airfield area is not used for the placement of anti-aircraft missile systems and radar units of the Russian Federation's missile forces. And third, they use almost all airfield areas as transit depots for transferring ammunition. That's why it's so important for us, first and foremost, to destroy the airfields and everything located on them. Airfields, technical facilities, equipment, ammunition, and of course, the aircraft themselves.
Roman Leonidovich, I wanted to talk to you about aviation. In the meantime, dear audience, please like this video and write in the comments what you think about the successful operations of the ISU and about the idea that Crimea should burn, that military facilities should be destroyed, and that Russians should swim back to Russia using the breaststroke or crawl. Roman Grigorievich, can we assume that these airfields that were attacked last night, was enemy aviation also attacked there, or did we only target the fuel complexes? What do you think?
Well, not all of the airfields currently have Russian aircraft stationed at them. They have mostly pulled back to central and eastern airfields in Crimea. That's why some of the airfields are used by the Russians either for army aviation or for helicopters or for so-called auxiliary purposes, or for deploying anti-aircraft missile systems and radio-technical troop systems. So this is very important for us. In order to deliver serious strikes against Russian aviation, including for that, we first need to achieve air superiority. That starts with destroying ground-based surveillance and response systems, meaning those same anti-aircraft missile systems. That's exactly what started today. The thing is, such operations have already been launched several times, and then they would just stop as if by magic. How many times have we talked about this? Here's the start, and then suddenly it all shuts down for a month and a half, 2 months, and no one even glances at Crimea, at least not sideways. Now, well, I'm just afraid of being wrong again, but if this is the beginning of Crimea's liberation, then attacks like this should happen every night. Every night, hundreds of drones should be entering Crimea.
Roman Igorovich, regarding the special operation of the SBU, the Russian side, and including the missile carriers. We see that during massive missile attacks, missile carriers go out into the Black Sea. As far as I understand, they hide them in Novorossiysk and bring them out to sea on the necessary days. The question is, how can we attack all the missile carriers today so that the Black Sea fleet ceases to exist?
Well, they only have left ships and submarines with missile systems and submarines. There are also surface ships carrying Caliber missiles, and as for the submarines, they usually have 4 each. The author is referring to Caliber-equipped underwater vehicles. Ships can have 4, 6, or 8, but it depends on which launcher is installed. A few months ago, our banking company was working with the Saudis. With the bank, it committed not to strike Russian oil refineries, the Russian oil industry, and also the Black Sea fleet. That's why they now feel at home, at least in the eastern waters of the Black Sea. So here the question is, first of all, for the politicians, or rather, not even the politicians anymore. Now it's a question for the security services. Why haven't they arrested them for treason yet? Those politicians who ensured the security of Russian hydrocarbons and the Russian Black Sea fleet, and the Russians leave the base, say, in Novorossiysk and go out to sea only to avoid being hit. That is, when they enter the base, it's a compact area with a high concentration of Russian ships. They move out of the strike zone and then naturally return, mainly for maintenance purposes.
Are our capabilities sufficient for Ukrainian special services to carry out something similar but only on Russian territory? Do they match? Let's discuss this.
Well, from a military standpoint, the preparation and execution of the operation were carried out at the highest level. Intelligence agencies were involved, including Mossad and several other Israeli agencies, plus the Air Force. Again, pay attention. The main thing here is the Air Force. That is long-range strike capabilities. About 200 fighter jets or various types of aircraft took off and struck previously identified targets, and the air defense had been practically neutralized beforehand by Mossad special operations. So it was a combined attack, well thought out, well prepared, and well executed. But that's from a military perspective. It's like if we were now discussing whether the executioner's axe that beheaded someone was sharp enough, say some queen. Well, yes, it was sharp, no question about that. The real question is, why was there a need to behead at all? That's a different question, a different aspect. The thing is, these strikes on Iran or Israel at this point will ignite a war in the Middle East, and this will affect us as well. It will hit us at the very least, first of all, by raising oil prices. Right now, the price of oil has already gone up by more than 10%, and it could rise to 30%. That is, oil could rebound to $100 per barrel. This means Russia will get twice as many petrodollars as before. There had been a trend of declining oil prices, a trend of Russia's economy slowing down. Now it's all the opposite, turned 180 degrees. Oil prices will rise, Russian hydrocarbon revenues will increase, and naturally there will be growth in the production of military equipment, the purchase of ammunition, and the recruitment and deployment of new soldiers. So the war in the Middle East will hit us very hard through the upturn in Russia. And at the very moment when it was necessary to destroy Russia's hydrocarbon sector, our banking cabal shielded Russian oil and gas facilities from strikes by our intelligence services and from attacks by our army. How can we counteract this? By reactivating the mechanism of sanctions and targeted strikes. The most effective sanctions against the Russian oil and gas sector are its complete destruction, especially since it is practically begging to be destroyed. But so that in the end, yes, even Russian partisans are doing this now. We can see how they set forests on fire where Russian oil pipelines run, how they set fires, as we mentioned, even in the far eastern Ukrainian People's Republic, in Komsomolsk-on-Amur, which is actually Dunar, our so-called green wedge. An oil refinery was burning there.
Roman Lvovich, why is it that what can be done with Iran can't be done with Russia today?
Well, first of all, we have nothing to do it with. Believe me, if we had the means, some of our agencies would have done it long ago. We don't have missiles, we don't have ballistic missiles, cruise missiles. Even though there should have been, in a rocket-producing country like Ukraine, there are no missiles. It's both laughable and tragic. This is a question for all the authorities for more than 30 years. To hell with independence. We were left without missiles during Russia's offensive operations. So, yes, it can definitely be done, but it's us who have to do it. No one is going to do anything for us, and there's no point in asking anyone else. We have to do it ourselves and see it through, including targeting the Russian leadership, those in the Kremlin, the Rablyovka bathhouses and the Kremlin. How long have we been talking about this? We've been discussing this for 3 years. What else is there to talk about? That's how it should be. What should there be? Strikes on certain Iranian military targets. Well, first of all, on nuclear facilities. Well, it's not that easy to reach a nuclear facility. For example, the facility that was attacked by the Israelis is buried more than 50 meters underground. You can't just get to it like that. That's one thing. And secondly, above this facility, above the centrifuges, above the reactor and the centrifuges, an 8-meter thick layer of concrete. In other words, they were fully prepared there. So in reality, Iran's nuclear facilities were not damaged. In Bushehr, the plant runs on Russian fuel, and in that sense, it hasn't been touched at all. There are about 5 or 6 Iranian facilities that, well, were left unscathed. They only tried to hit one, and while they did hit it, it was only from above. Inside, it kept working as usual. The centrifuges are still spinning, so what will Iran's response be? Well, who knows? Especially now, since the so-called Pandora's box has been opened. In other words, there was a strike on a nuclear facility. So now Iran could strike with nuclear materials, yes, even with nuclear waste in the end. They could take the waste from Bushehr and cover Israel with strontium and cesium. People wouldn't be able to live there for 24,000 years. At least that's the case with cesium, I think. And if they hit with uranium, U-235 or U-238 in just one half-life, the half-life is several million years for one and 4.5 billion years for the other. So can you imagine what would happen to Israel in that case? So again, who will end up suffering? The Zionists will slip away, they'll run off to the United States. It will be the ordinary Israelis who stay behind and take the brunt of the radiation. These are things that must never be allowed. Strikes on nuclear facilities are absolutely unacceptable, categorically and in principle. There are certain international monitoring mechanisms like the IAEA, and it has been granted access to some sites. Recently, the extension of the 2015 agreement was almost ready, again under IAEA supervision. That's why the Israelis carried out a preemptive strike, specifically to prevent the agreement with Europe, and they managed to do so. In other words, they didn't give Iran the chance to sign that agreement. If there had been an agreement, it would have worked just like the one from 2015 to 2018, when the IAEA fully monitored all stages of production. There was significant uranium processing, and that's why. The Israelis have now created for themselves, or rather, that's not quite right. The Israelis have created a problem for ordinary Israelis. And what will the response be? Well, it's not easy to say right off the bat, But the Iranians aren't just ordinary people either, believe me. There are at least an order of magnitude more of them, at least in terms of numbers. And no one is going to forgive things like that. So ahead lies a serious and bloody war, which for us, it's negative. It hasn't brought us any positives, and it won't. Why? Because the shahids, everyone talks about the Iranian ones and so on, they're basically like Chinese sunflower 200s. The Russian Garan is not an Iranian Shahid. The Russian Garan is a Chinese Sunflower 200. No matter how many military facilities you destroy in Iran, the Russians will keep assembling the Chinese Sunflower 200 from Chinese parts, calling it Garan, and they'll continue to do so. If we're talking about striking the main factories and production sites, then it should be the Chinese ones. What are the Israelis going to fly to China to destroy Chinese factories? This is something our intelligence services should be doing. These are questions for our intelligence services.
Dear audience, please like this video. Write in the comments what you think. We return to our main topic, to Russian aggression, to Russia's war against Ukraine. Roman Grigorievich regarding the oil depot, for example, at the Crystal oil depot in Engels, another fuel tank caught fire. The whole city is covered in smoke. Essentially, drones attacked the oil depot on the night of June 5th to 6th, but the fire still hasn't been extinguished. Let's evaluate this operation.
Well, first of all, this is not just an oil depot, or rather, not an ordinary oil depot. If we're talking about oil depots, the Russians have thousands of them. In reality, it's a fuel and lubricant storage facility for the airfield, serving as a backup for Engels 2 aviation. And it's precisely in this role that it is very important to us. This is a consumable storage facility, the main base and primary storage for aviation kerosene. It's underground, located in karst caves and caisson reservoirs. In other words, just try to get there. There are tens of thousands of tons of kerosene stored there. So from this underground reservoir, the fuel is pumped into the supply base at Crystal, and then, well, the base or the fuel and lubricants depot, as we call it. From there, it goes on to refuel the same aircraft. And the point that was chosen was exactly right, where you can at least cut off the main flow. Of course, they also have a backup option where they can refuel directly from the caissons. But I think we'll get to those as well. So the strike on this fuel and lubricants depot was excellently executed, precisely calculated. We discussed with you how the attack was carried out. They broke through the Russian air defense head-on using a large number of decoy drones, and the strike drones got through, took out the target, and set 3 tanks on fire at once right from the start. And until it burns out completely, this won't stop. Kerosene is an interesting product. You can actually use it to put out fires. For example, if you take a bucket of kerosene, pour it onto a fire, the fire goes out, but it's the kerosene vapors that burn. And if you heat the kerosene up to a certain temperature and then ignite the vapors, just like what happened during the drone strike, then it's almost impossible to put out. And that's why they don't even try to extinguish it. They just step aside, dig around it, and watch until it all burns out. And as long as there's something left to burn, it will keep burning. It could keep burning for another month.
Roman Grigorievich, today's news. Russia has lost another Su-25.
Well, most likely these losses are due to technical issues. The Su-25s are already 40 years old. They've been flying since the Afghan war, since the 1980s. They're not bad aircraft, even excellent for their time when they were built, a good attack plane, but they're already old, really old grandpas, I would say. And technologically, of course, they're falling apart, and there aren't as many spare parts as before when you could make 1 out of 2 or 3. So this fleet of aircraft the Russians have is dwindling, and even just crashing like that, as happened today with the loss of a Russian plane.
Roman Grigorievich, over the past 2 days, we've also attacked the Moscow region, where there were military targets. Roman Grigorievich, what was attacked in the last few days near Moscow? Because the drones didn't reach Moscow, but explosions were heard in the Moscow region? They say these were military targets.
About 30% of Russia's high-tech military production is concentrated in Moscow and the Moscow region. So a third, 30%, is in Moscow and the Moscow region. That's why it's very important for us to break through, to keep pushing through the Russian air defense. It's very difficult to do this because there are at least 2, let's say, blocking lines in place. The first is the frontal air defense. It's very hard to break through. That's in the Bryansk, Belgorod, and Kursk regions, which are practically packed with air defense systems facing toward Moscow. And the second is the site-specific air defense around Moscow. So sometimes when we see reports that the Russians have shot down 50 or 70 of our drones in the Bryansk and Belgorod regions, those were headed for Moscow. Mostly they're shooting down decoys that cost a few $100, while the missile to shoot them down costs tens of thousands of dollars. Still some get through. And so there was a strike in the Moscow region on one of the factories that produces electronic circuit boards. As I said, this is a high-tech facility, and at least for now, the technological process has been halted. But in reality, to actually reach Moscow, you need ballistic missiles. In other words, without ballistic missiles, we won't be able to break through Moscow's site-specific air defense. Drones won't be able to take it out.
Roman Grigorievich, in the Moscow region near Zubovo, a microelectronics factory was attacked. There's a hole in the roof. The factory in Zubovo is a production complex that is part of the Rezonit Technopark in the Moscow region. It specializes in the production of printed circuit boards, electronic and electrical components for various industries, including defense and industrial sectors. That's what this is about?
That's what I was talking about, yes. So they hit Rezonit directly. The technological cycle has been halted. That's the most important thing, but it can only be destroyed with ballistic missiles. Well, even if a drone carries 50 kilograms of explosives, it won't completely disable any military facility.
Roman Grigorievich, from a military standpoint, how many years would it take for Ukraine to develop ballistic missiles? Not just a few, of course, but to have them in mass production. How long would that take? 1,000 missiles per year? If we take examples from other countries that produce ballistic missiles.
Well, the thing is, Ukraine is a rocket-producing country. Back in the Soviet Union, we had a full production cycle for several types of missiles, starting from air-to-air and air-to-ship missiles. For example, the KH-35 and KH-35U, which served as the basis for the Neptune missile. So that's an aircraft-launched missile designed against ships. In other words, it's an anti-ship missile launched from the air. We produced it ourselves, the entire process, full cycle. There were several other missiles of this type as well. And ballistic missiles. We produced ballistic, well, these are cruise missiles, if you can call them that, especially the KH-35U at this level. And as for ballistic missiles, we produced intercontinental ballistic missiles. The Satan SS-18, yes, manufactured by our Yuzhmash plant. It has a range of 11,000 kilometers, which means it could reach Beijing and Pyongyang. So we have preserved this entire technological chain, the technical documentation, the production system, very important mechanisms for certain tests, test stands, and of course the engineering staff. We produced, well, 10 years ago, we produced and launched the GROM, a whole complex that we created with an investment of $100 million with an audit, and then sold it to them. That was just a few years ago. So we have the entire production base for manufacturing ballistic missiles. It's not like we're starting from scratch. In order to launch, say, serial production of those same GROM missiles with the range of 500 kilometers, we would need somewhere around $150 to $200 million in about a year and a half to 2 years. So if this government had started this 6 years ago, by now we could have launched serial production of the GROM 2 3 times over. If we don't have this GROM at the moment, and we don't because otherwise it would have long since been used on Moscow, it means that for 6 years this government has just been dragging its feet. This is a big problem. The executive branch should have been sent to the armed forces of Ukraine a long time ago. I've said it so many times already, the executive branch needs to be deshmayalized, and for that we don't need elections or re-elections. This is in accordance with our constitution, within the legal framework of our laws, and the executive branch should be replaced. Shmihal's team just can't handle it, absolutely can't. Shmihal and all the rest of that Shmihal crowd are already dead weight. They're not in the right place. They need to be replaced with professionals who know how to quickly launch a program, even a ballistic one, or how to restructure the country's economy for wartime. But that's an entire process. The work should be done by military people with basic military education and an understanding of economics. We have enough people like that.
Roman Grigorievich, to wrap up, so Special Operations Forces destroyed the decision-making center of the Rashists in the Kherson direction, and the Rashist headquarters in Makivka was also attacked. A video report of the HIMARS MLRS strike was made for the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Everyone wrote that there were many KIA, many wounded. The floor is yours.
Well, about Makivka, I'm from Makivka myself. I've been saying for so long that we never hit the rear areas. So most likely our rocket troops thought so that Svitan doesn't start cursing and just went ahead and struck Makivka from all sides. The main thing is it was not far from my house. So the combat mission was accomplished, of course. Well done, the range allows it, we have the means to strike. HIMARS work well at that range. And of course in Kherson, on the so-called southern front, There's a lot of serious Russian activity going on there right now. They're still at a crossroads, deciding where to send the remaining reserves, either to reinforce the Zaporizhia direction, meaning the operations there, or to the right bank of the Dnipro near Kherson. So they haven't decided yet because the reserves that could have helped them in either direction, Putin burned through before May 9th, setting unrealistic tasks, in other words, impossible objectives. So right now, at this moment, we can say, let's thank Putin for his complete idiocy in strategic planning, because it's precisely his idiocy, this political trap, that's giving us a breather right now. We still have about 2 months before the next wave of reserves arrives. During these 2 months, we can give the Russians a hard time. Well, we'll see what exactly we'll give them a hard time for, and we'll talk about it in each of our reviews.
Roman Grigorievich, we're already at the end. The Russian armed forces have entered Yablonovka in the Sumy region, according to Deep State. That's 26 kilometers from the regional center. The gray zone has also expanded in Yunakovka, a village at the epicenter of the fighting. Please comment on this, it's very important.
Yablonovka and Yunakovka. Well, yesterday they said they were 20 kilometers from Sumy, and now it's already 26 kilometers. So does that mean they're having a negative advance? They retreated 6 kilometers in the opposite direction? That's about where they are, somewhere between 20 and 30 kilometers. They're stuck there and will keep being stuck in that area. It's a small bridgehead, even from the perspective of just the Sumy region, not to mention all of Ukraine. A small bridgehead that the Russians seized by following right on the heels of our retreating troops. That was a mistake made by our own politicians. Earlier, we thanked Putin for his political decision, but here it was our politicians' mistake. They held our troops in offensive positions on the Kursk direction, almost to the point of disaster, nearly to catastrophe. Then we had to run because the politicians, you see, wanted to have negotiations with the Saudis, from a better position at least. Nothing came of it for them, but we had to flee from the Kursk region. And as our troops retreated, the Russians pushed right into the Sumy region on their heels. But I'll say it again. This is about the same level as in the Kharkiv region. They're now in the area of Lipetsk and near Vovchansk. They rushed in, and that's it. They're stuck. The Russians will be stuck in the same way around Yablonivka, Yanakivka, and so on, but no further. They won't advance any farther. That is, on the one hand, there are serious fortifications there, first of all. Secondly, reserves have now been redirected there, and our troops have already recovered from this strategic failure of our politicians. They've already recovered, and now in some areas, we're even regaining previously lost positions, pushing the Russians back, and we're advancing in the Kursk direction toward Tetkino, which is nearby to the west. The Russians entered our territory and we entered theirs. Alaverdi.
Friends, please like this video. Roman Grigorievich and I meet 3 times a week on my YouTube channel, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, to discuss the military and political situation. In the comments, write a few kind words in support of Ukraine and share your thoughts on Israel's special operation. Also, let us know where you're watching from, share your location. The well-known military analyst Roman Svitan. Roman Grigorievich, thank you. And as always, see you again on Monday.